Every day, millions of Americans clock in, unaware that some co-workers walk beside them with storms no one can see, paranoia, resentment, delusion. Most of the time, these emotions fade, but sometimes they ignite when pressure breaks the fragile, when humiliation becomes obsession, and when the wrong person meets the wrong moment. Ordinary workplaces become battlegrounds. These are the stories of 10 violent eruptions, 10 moments when everyday workers unleashed unthinkable terror, and the quiet warning signs everyone missed. Workplace massacres, the angers that built a breaking point. Chapter 1: The Assistant Inth Private Elevator. In cities built on ambition and steel, danger usually comes from the outside. Strangers, rivals, shadows in alleys. At least, that's what people want to believe. But the truth is more unsettling, because the most dangerous people aren't always strangers. Sometimes they're the ones who know your passwords, your schedules, your weaknesses. Sometimes they're the ones you let into your life, willingly. And on a warm July night in Manhattan, one rising tech star stepped into his private elevator believing he was heading home to silence and comfort, while a very different kind of silence followed him inside. It was the quiet of someone who had already made up his mind. The penthouse in Lower Manhattan wasn't just an apartment, it was a statement, a symbol of how far he had come. Floor-to-ceiling windows, imported stone floors, a private elevator with direct access to his living room, no hallways, no neighbors, no random faces. Only those allowed were those he trusted. The tech founder behind this luxurious world was young, only in his early 30s, but already a global figure, a builder of companies, a leader in emerging markets, someone who people described as visionary, intense, and endlessly generous. He had risen so far, so fast, that many believed he was still just getting started. But even visionaries need help. Schedules, meetings, financial oversight, personal errands, none of it could be done alone. That's where he made his first mistake, or maybe, his last. The assistant who worked beside him wasn't just an employee, he was a gatekeeper, a confidant, a young man who had been given access to the inner workings of his life, the kind of access that blurs the line between professional and personal. He managed travel, transactions, passwords, appointments. He handled credit cards. He handled trust. The founder saw potential in him. He believed he was giving a young person a chance to grow, to excel, to build his own future. He didn't realize he was handing him a motive instead. Stealing rarely begins boldly. It begins quietly, softly. One small transfer, then another and another. At first the amounts were negligible, so small they could pass as clerical mistakes. But theft has gravity. Once it begins, it pulls everything else with it. Soon he was taking more. Thousands, then tens of thousands. Access had become opportunity. Opportunity had become entitlement. Entitlement had become dependence. Eventually the founder confronted him, not with rage, not with threats, but with disappointment. He didn't fire him. He didn't expose him. He didn't call the police. Instead, he did something rare. He forgave him. He offered a repayment plan, a way to keep his job, a way to rebuild trust. It was an extraordinary gesture, one friends would later say came from his deep belief in potential, in second chances, in people. He didn't realize that forgiveness can sometimes feel like pressure. To the assistant, that mercy was not relief. It was a countdown. He feared the founder might change his mind, might report him later, might expose everything he'd done. Fear twisted into paranoia. Paranoia twisted into resentment. Forgiveness had turned into a threat. July 13th, a summer night in Manhattan, the city buzzing beneath glowing skyscrapers. The founder walked into his lobby, greeted the doorman, and stepped into the private elevator as he had hundreds of times before. The camera in the elevator never captured his last expression clearly. He was looking at his phone, reading a message, distracted, trusting a space designed to be safe. But 30 seconds later, another figure stepped in, a figure dressed in black, face covered, shoulders lowered, head angled away from the lens. He pressed no buttons. He didn't need to. The elevator only went to one place, the private penthouse. For the entire ride, the two men stood only feet apart, one believing he was heading home, the other preparing to end him. There were no words, no warnings, only the hum of machinery and the quiet decision of a man who believed that killing the person who forgave him was somehow his only way out. The elevator doors opened. They both stepped into the penthouse. The camera captured that final moment. Then the doors closed. When the founder didn't respond to calls the next morning, a family member arrived at the building. He took the private elevator up, walked into the penthouse, and stopped. The scene was not chaotic, not rushed, not anything resembling panic. It was organized, methodical. almost clinical. Cleaning supplies were carefully lined up, trash bags arranged neatly, a vacuum placed beside the body, industrial tools positioned as if part of a plan interrupted. Whoever did this intended to return, to finish cleaning, to erase, to stage. This wasn't rage. This was strategy. Detectives immediately recognized the pattern. Someone who knew the home well. Someone who felt comfortable enough to move freely inside it. Someone with access, personal or professional. But the real evidence was still to come. Hours after the murder, a credit card belonging to the victim was used at a nearby store. The purchase: cleaning supplies, trash bags, tools, exactly the same items found in the penthouse. Detectives reviewed the store's footage and saw something unmistakable. The same figure from the elevator, same clothes, same posture, same deliberate movements. It connected instantly. Elevator gives penthouse, gives store, gives purchases, gives crime scene, and every line pointed to one person, the assistant, a man who should never have had reason to fear the man who forgave him. When police found him days later at an Airbnb, he was calm. To calm, he still had the stun device believed to have been used during the attack. He didn't deny anything. He didn't show fear. He didn't show remorse. It was as if he had rehearsed this outcome in his mind, over and over. The trial was not explosive. It was chilling. Prosecutors didn't rely on emotion. They used the assistant's own behavior, his own logic. They revealed the timeline, the theft, the confrontation, the forgiveness, the resentment, the disguise, the elevator, the killing, the cleanup, the credit card use, the calmness afterward. The defense attempted to argue stress, panic, desperation, but prosecutors had a stronger argument. He planned all of it. He prepared for all of it. He executed all of it. This wasn't a moment of emotional collapse. It was a decision, a cold, calculated decision to eliminate the one person he feared, not because that person threatened him, but because that person had power over him. He was sentenced to 40 years to life. Friends described the founder as someone who believed deeply in people. He didn't believe in casting people aside. He believed in second chances, in growth, in redemption. His death revealed a darker truth. Second chances only work when the person receiving them wants to change, not when they want to hide, not when they want to eliminate the person who knows what they've done. The tech world reacted with shock. Startups reviewed who they gave financial access to. Founders reconsidered how much trust they offered to assistants, interns, financial managers, because behind the glamour of entrepreneurship lies a simple reality. The more successful you become, the more vulnerable you are to the people closest to you. Trust is a currency. Trust builds empires. But in the wrong hands, trust can become a weapon. And inside that private elevator sealed between floors, between silence, between fate, trust became fatal. Chapter 2: The Professor Who Snapped in Silence. Universities are places of thought, of debate, of ideas rising and clashing without violence. At least, that is the belief students carry with them as they walk across manicured lawns and brick pathways. But on a cold February afternoon, inside a second-floor conference room where faculty gathered for a routine meeting, that belief shattered. The people inside that room were scholars, researchers, advisors, individuals who spent their lives teaching others to think, to argue, to reason. None of them expected someone among them to abandon reason entirely. None of them expected that the quietest person in the room would be the most dangerous, and yet in just a few minutes, no more than the span of a short lecture, a brilliant professor turned a place of learning into a place of irreversible loss. She entered academia the same way many brilliant minds do, through excellence. Her degrees came from top-tier universities, the kind with ivy-covered gates and reputations built over centuries. She was seen as gifted, ambitious, dedicated. Students admired her. Colleagues respected her. Administrators valued her achievements. But brilliance is not immunity, and sometimes brilliance hides fractures. She had always been intense-driven by the need to excel, to prove herself worthy in a field defined by competition. Her research was groundbreaking, though slow. Her teaching evaluations were mixed. Some students adored her enthusiasm. Others felt unsettled by her sudden shifts in mood. But academia tolerates eccentricity. It expects it. It even romanticizes it. So when colleagues noticed she grew defensive in conversations, they dismissed it as stress. When she argued unnecessarily during meetings, they saw it as academic passion. When she isolated herself in her office and avoided faculty gatherings, they assumed she was focused. No one questioned whether the pressure was building. No one asked whether she was unraveling. No one considered that her silence wasn't concentration, but containment. And behind that containment lay a history. A history no one at the university fully understood. Tenure isn't just a promotion, it is the crown jewel of academic life. It determines everything: income, status, future stability, and professional identity. A denial can feel like erasure, like someone taking a razor blade to your entire career. For her, the denial shattered something essential. She had put years into her research, poured herself into moments of brilliance that came at the cost of sleep, relationships, and mental health. And now she was told it wasn't enough. She wasn't enough. Her future was uncertain. The weeks that followed were filled with unpredictable behavior. Colleagues described her as tense, agitated, silent one moment and explosive the next. She spoke less in meetings, then she spoke too much. She avoided eye contact, then she stared at people intensely. But universities are slow to act. They are structured, procedural, hesitant to escalate interpersonal discomfort into formal intervention. So the warning signs passed like whispers in hallways, noticed, but never connected. Meanwhile, the fracture inside her widened. February 12th, a routine Friday. Weather cold enough that faculty hurried between buildings with coats pulled tight. At 3 p.m., a dozen professors gathered in a conference room on the second floor of the science building. This was the weekly departmental meeting: announcements, updates, discussions about curriculum, research funding, student performance, committee assignments. She walked in quietly, sat in her usual seat, placed her bag beside her chair. She didn't greet anyone, she didn't show irritation, she didn't show anything. As the meeting began, colleagues noticed she was unusually calm, almost eerily still. Someone discussed grant applications, someone else reviewed hiring prospects, a third raised concerns about lab equipment. The conversation drifted around her like static. On camera footage later reviewed by investigators, she appears motionless for nearly 10 minutes, eyes fixed on an unknown point in the room, hands folded in her lap, face devoid of emotion. And then she stood. She reached into her bag and pulled out a handgun. The movement was mechanical, efficient, not frantic. The first shot struck the department chair. He collapsed instantly. The second hit the professor beside him. A third followed within seconds. The room erupted into chaos, chairs scraping, papers scattering, people diving under the table. But she continued firing with terrifying calmness. This wasn't rage. This wasn't loss of control. This was execution. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She didn't say a word. She moved with the cold precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment inside her mind, replayed it, refined it, embraced it. 3 faculty members died almost instantly. 3 more were severely injured. In the back corner, a graduate assistant dialed 911 with shaking hands, whispering desperately into the phone. When her gun clicked empty, she paused, tilted her head, looked at the door. She tried to open it, but the mechanism jammed. For a moment she appeared confused. Then she put down the gun, stepped away from the carnage, and walked to a nearby bathroom as if simply leaving an exhausting meeting. She passed students in the hallway. They had no idea what had happened to rooms away. Within minutes, police swept the building. She was detained without resistance. As she was handcuffed, witnesses said she looked calm, not relieved, not angry, just calm, as if everything she had carried inside her, years of pressure, resentment, denial, instability, had finally left her. The country was stunned. How could a respected professor, someone trusted, brilliant, accomplished, commit something so cold, so violent, so deliberate? But as investigators dug deeper, pieces of a disturbing past emerged. When she was a teenager, her younger brother died from a gunshot wound while they were handling a shotgun. She claimed it was an accident. No charges were filed. Years later, she was involved in a violent altercation at a restaurant. She allegedly assaulted a woman over a dispute. The case never led to jail time. She had also shown patterns of emotional instability, anger, paranoia, sudden mood swings. Individually, these incidents were concerning. Combined, they painted a disturbing trajectory. But none of her colleagues had known. None of it appeared in her tenure review. None of it was ever disclosed at the university. It was a past that lived quietly beneath the surface, unseen, unspoken, and unaddressed. The trial became national news. Every headline echoed the same disbelief. A Harvard-educated professor commits mass shooting on campus. Her defense team argued mental illness, psychological deterioration, dissociation triggered by the stress of tenure denial. But prosecutors had a different narrative. This was planned, premeditated, deliberate. They pointed to her calm demeanor, the weapon purchased months earlier, the chosen location, the timing of the meeting, the silence before the attack. They argued she targeted those involved in her tenure decision. The courtroom watched as her colleagues, some wounded, some grieving, described how she fired without emotion. One survivor said, "She wasn't there. I mean, she was standing in the room, but she wasn't there." In the end, she accepted a plea to avoid the death penalty, life in prison, no parole. A brilliant academic career reduced to a prison number. The university was shaken in ways no campus ever prepares for. Faculty members who had spent decades debating ideas now debated safety protocols. Students cried in hallways. Parents demanded answers. Administrators rebuilt rooms and rewrote policies. Counselors were brought in. Memorials were held. Scholarships were established in the victims' names, but the emotional wound remained. Professors who had taught for 20 years now hesitated before entering meetings. Students avoided the science building long after the blood had been cleaned. Security presence increased. Doors were reinforced. Tenure review processes were updated. And a question echoed through the halls. How do you recognize danger in someone whose entire identity is built on intellect? Not this tragedy taught academia something it rarely confronts. Stress does not excuse violence, but ignored stress can evolve into catastrophe. Universities push faculty hard, publish, teach, research, mentor, apply for grants, but emotional pressure has a breaking point, and in a field that celebrates the mind, no one wants to believe the mind can fracture, yet it can, and it did. This chapter serves as a reminder, sometimes the most dangerous storm is the one happening inside someone's head, quietly, invisibly, until it finally breaks. Chapter 3. The postal employer were returned with a list. Postal facilities are designed for efficiency. Conveyor belts humming, forklifts moving, workers sorting, scanning, loading, unloading, an endless river of letters and packages that connect millions every single day. But inside one such facility, something else had been building for years, not in the machinery, not in the mailrooms, but inside the mind of a former employee whose quiet instability had turned into a storm no one tried to stop. She didn't break overnight. She deteriorated slowly, quietly, silently, until she turned a workplace she once depended on into the site of one of the most chilling postal tragedies in American history. This is the story of how subtle paranoia became violent delusion, how systems failed, and how a single return through an employee entrance changed countless lives forever. When she first joined the U.S. Postal Service, she wasn't remarkable. She wasn't a top performer, but she wasn't a troublemaker either. She was quiet, withdrawn, hard to read. Some colleagues described her as odd, others said she kept to herself. No one said she was dangerous, but the early signs were there, subtle, faint, easily dismissed. She often believed co-workers were talking about her behind her back. She felt targeted during routine corrections. She interpreted casual remarks as hidden attacks. She believed managers disliked her. Psychologists call these ideas of reference moments when harmless interactions feel personal, threatening, conspiratorial. At first, co-workers just shrugged. Everyone has quirks. Every workplace has tension, but her behavior wasn't stable. It was deteriorating. And the deterioration wasn't loud. It was silent. As the months passed, the signs weren't subtle anymore. She began arguing with supervisors over small issues. She believed the Postal Service was watching her. She accused co-workers of plotting against her. Her complaints grew stranger. "They're tapping my phone. People are following me. Someone is trying to poison me. I know they're planning something." Her grip on reality loosened. Her paranoia sharpened. Eventually, management placed her on psychiatric leave. They hoped time away would stabilize her. They hoped distance would help. But untreated paranoia isn't soothed by distance, it grows in it. Away from work, she spiraled deeper into delusion. She moved to New Mexico, living in temporary housing, drifting between towns. Neighbors reported strange accusations. She would knock on doors to warn people about invisible threats. She believed satellites were monitoring her every move. She thought the Postal Service had sent agents to follow her. She lived inside an expanding universe of fear, and nothing was pulling her back to reality. Years passed. Most people at the postal plant forgot her name, but she never forgot them. In her fractured mind, they were still the ones who wronged her, watched her, betrayed her. Her paranoia didn't fade with distance, it sharpened into focus. She traveled back to California. Investigators later found notes listing names, grievances, angry rantings. But before she reached the postal facility, she made one stop, the home of a former neighbor, a woman who had shown her kindness. A woman who had no conflict with her. A woman who became, in her mind, part of the conspiracy. At approximately 7 p.m., a single gunshot echoed in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the first victim of the night. Then she got back into her vehicle and drove toward the place where her paranoia had first taken root, her old postal facility. It was late, shifts were transitioning, workers were on break, forklifts were still moving packages. Security at postal facilities in the early 2000s was functional but not sophisticated. A simple ID badge could grant access. Her badge had been deactivated years ago, but she had stolen another employee's. She walked to the employee entrance wearing dark clothing. The badge beeped. The door unlocked. She stepped inside. The cameras captured her calmly moving through the building, a place she once knew intimately, now a labyrinth of imagined enemies. Workers sorting packages looked up, surprised. Some recognized her, some didn't, but before anyone could process why she was there, she raised her weapon. The first shots created confusion, metallic echoes bouncing against machinery, shouts spreading through the sorting floor. She moved with chilling purpose. This was not random. Her paranoia had created a mental list, targets, faces she believed were part of the conspiracy. She shot 6 co-workers, each one a person she believed had contributed to her suffering. Panic spread through the facility. Some workers hid behind mail bins, others ran out loading doors into the night. Supervisors called 911, but the attack lasted only minutes. She walked through the building until she reached a hallway near the loading dock. There, she turned the gun on herself. The spree was over, but the fallout had just begun. Investigators combed through her belongings, her car, her motel room, her journals. What they found was a chilling portrait of untreated psychosis, pages and pages of scribbled notes about conspiracies, diagrams connecting co-workers to imaginary plots, letters addressed to no one, ramblings about poison, surveillance, microchips, and betrayal, lists of grievances, lists of imagined enemies, and in the middle of it all, a sentence repeated again and again: they were watching me. Her mental decline had been severe, long-term, and uncontained. Psychiatrists later said she exhibited classic signs of paranoid schizophrenia, delusions, auditory hallucinations, disorganized thinking, heightened aggression under stress. But because she refused treatment and because no system forced intervention, she slipped through the cracks. Her attack wasn't a spontaneous explosion, it was the endpoint of years of suffering, unchecked, untreated, unnoticed. In the aftermath, the U.S. Postal Service faced scrutiny. How did a former employee with a documented history of mental instability re-enter a secure facility with a stolen ID badge? Why weren't her earlier warning signs escalated? Why wasn't her psychiatric leave followed up? Why was she able to drift into severe psychosis without intervention? No one had answers, only acknowledgments of a broken system. The tragedy exposed several failures. 1. Weak security protocols, but only access allowed a stolen card to bypass all safeguards. 2. No mental health checks during or after psychiatric leave. She simply disappeared from the system. No follow-up. No welfare checks, no required evaluations. 3. Lack of communication between agencies. Her deteriorating behavior in New Mexico never reached her former employer. 4. A workplace culture untrained for mental health crisis response. Co-workers had seen warning signs years earlier, but without guidance, they dismissed them. The attack forced the Postal Service to re-evaluate everything: access control badge, deactivation, employee mental health monitoring, threat assessment procedures. But policy changes came too late for the 6 workers who died that night. The facility shut down for days. Grief counselors arrived. Flags were lowered. Workers cried in break rooms where laughter once echoed. The smell of machinery and sorting bins carried a different weight. Families gathered for vigils. One spouse said, "He went to work to sort mail, not to die." A co-worker said, "We knew she had problems. We never knew they would come back to kill us." Another whispered through tears, "I saw her walk in. I thought she was visiting someone. I never thought." Her voice trailed off. The tragedy didn't just take lives, it took security, confidence, the belief that a workplace could be predictable. For months, workers jumped whenever a door opened unexpectedly. Some never returned, some transferred. Some left the Postal Service entirely. Trauma reshaped the building. Her story isn't easy to categorize. She wasn't purely a villain. She wasn't purely a victim. She was both a woman drowning in untreated mental illness and a perpetrator of devastating violence. The tragedy teaches several painful truths. 1. Untreated psychosis can become dangerous. Not all mental illness leads to violence. but untreated paranoia can create threats where none exist. 2. Systems fail when follow-ups fail. Psychiatric leave without monitoring is not protection, it is abandonment. 3. Access control must evolve. Security based on trust, and familiarity is not security. 4. Workplaces need threat assessment training. Subtle signs should not be ignored. Patterns matter. 5. People can break quietly, and when they do, the consequences can echo far beyond the moment of collapse. This chapter is more than a recounting of violence. It is a warning about what happens when fear goes untreated, when institutions overlook early signs, and when someone returns not as who they were, but as who their mind convinced them they needed to become. Chapter 4: The termination meeting that turned into Minnesota's Idley's workplace shooting. There are moments in life when the world seems to balance on a thin thread: a single conversation, a simple decision, a routine meeting that should end with a signature, a handshake, and a quiet walk to the parking lot. But sometimes, beneath that ordinary moment, there's a storm no one else can see. On the afternoon of September 27, 2012, inside a small Minneapolis sign manufacturing company, 3 supervisors gathered in a conference room. They weren't preparing for a merger, a business pitch, or a strategic meeting. They were preparing to terminate an employee. They believed it would be tense, maybe emotional, but manageable. They never imagined the man walking toward them carried a weapon in his bag. They never imagined the meeting would end with the deadliest workplace shooting in Minnesota history. This is the story of a quiet employee whose life unraveled in isolation, a company that didn't know how deeply he was struggling, and a termination meeting that erupted into unstoppable violence. Accent Signage Systems wasn't a giant corporation. It wasn't a warehouse full of hundreds of employees. It was a tight-knit manufacturing business specializing in tactile and braille signage used across the country. The founder, a respected entrepreneur named Reuven Rohamim, built the company from nothing. Workers admired him, customers trusted him. He was known for his hands-on approach, walking the floor, checking machines, greeting workers by name. Accent Signage wasn't a place where people feared their bosses. It was a place that felt like a community. And inside that community was a man who, for more than a decade, slipped further and further into isolation. His name was Andrew John Engeldinger. Engeldinger had worked at Accent Signage for roughly 12 years. He wasn't outgoing, he wasn't talkative. He didn't attend company gatherings or socialize after hours. Co-workers remember him differently. He kept to himself. He was polite but distant. Not the kind of guy who'd cause trouble, just quiet. But that quietness wasn't calmness, it was retreat. Over the years, colleagues noticed subtle shifts. He avoided eye contact. He didn't join conversations. He grew increasingly withdrawn. He reacted defensively to minor corrections. He seemed perpetually tense. Small concerns rarely trigger action in a workplace. People assumed he was stressed, shy, introverted. But emotional deterioration doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it hides behind silence. By early 2012, supervisors had documented several performance issues. Quality checks weren't consistent. Deadlines were missed. Communication became strained. He wasn't aggressive. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten anyone. But he was slipping. Supervisors attempted to counsel him. They tried documenting concerns, giving corrective feedback, offering chances to improve. Nothing changed. In fact, he withdrew further. By summer, management faced a difficult decision. They needed someone reliable in his role. And he was becoming increasingly unpredictable. So they made the painful choice. He needed to be terminated. It wasn't personal. It was professional. But to him, it felt like something else entirely. September 27, 2012, was a crisp fall afternoon. Inside the building, supervisors gathered in a small conference room. Present were the company founder, Rohamim, the operations director, the head of human resources. They prepared paperwork. They rehearsed what to say. They expected frustration. They expected disagreement. They didn't expect what came next. When Engeldinger arrived, he walked through the building quietly. He carried a bag, something no one questioned. He stepped into the conference room. The meeting began calmly. Supervisors explained the decision, performance concerns, documentation, steps taken, and the final termination. He listened. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He didn't shout. Instead, he reached into his bag. In a matter of seconds, the conference room turned into chaos. He pulled out a handgun, a weapon he had legally purchased. Before anyone could react, he opened fire. The founder was struck first, collapsing against the table. The operations director tried to stand but was hit. The HR supervisor attempted to run but was shot before reaching the door. The attack was rapid, violent, overwhelming. Workers nearby heard screams, then gunfire, then silence. At first, many thought heavy equipment had malfunctioned. The sound echoed strangely across the manufacturing floor, but as employees saw others running, the truth hit them. A shooter was inside the building. After shooting the supervisors, he left the conference room and walked through the plant. His movements were controlled. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't running. He was searching for people. Workers dashed for exits. Some hid behind machines. Others fled out back doors into the parking lot. He shot multiple employees as he moved. Some were hit while trying to escape. Some while attempting to help others. Some simply walked into the wrong hallway at the worst possible moment. Within minutes, 5 employees lay dead. And then, as police sirens began to echo in the distance, he walked to a loading dock area at the back of the facility, and ended his own life with a final shot. The rampage was over. But the horror was only beginning for the survivors. The police secured the building and cordoned off the area. Scores of employees were interviewed. Families arrived in panic, praying their loved ones survived. Investigators discovered something chilling. He had been stockpiling ammunition for months. Thousands of rounds. Receipts showed deliberate preparation, purchases made long before termination was even discussed. This revealed something crucial. The shooting wasn't a sudden outburst. It wasn't heat-of-the-moment rage triggered by the meeting. It was planned. He had been preparing for violence long before the termination. Why? A clearer picture emerged when investigators spoke to his family. He had grown increasingly paranoid. He isolated himself from friends and relatives. He rejected all attempts to help. He refused mental health treatment. He lived alone, rarely interacting with anyone. His parents released a heartbreaking statement. He was deeply troubled, and we tried to help him, but he pushed everyone away. The tragedy wasn't the result of a single bad day. It was the culmination of years of untreated psychological decline. Because the shooter died at the scene, there was no trial, no defendant to interrogate, no courtroom testimony. But families of the victims wanted answers. Could the shooting have been prevented? Civil lawsuits soon followed, aimed at the company, the termination procedures, and broader workplace safety practices. The lawsuits didn't claim the company caused the violence, but argued they lacked protocols for handling high-risk terminations. Experts weighed in. 1. Should security be present during termination meetings, especially when dealing with employees showing signs of instability? 2. Should companies maintain threat assessment programs? Most small businesses don't. 3. Should management be trained to identify behavioral red flags? Many supervisors aren't equipped to recognize developing paranoia. 4. Was his termination process gentle enough, or too abrupt? There's no right answer. But the question remained. The company suffered deeply. Their founder was dead. Long-time employees were lost. Survivors carried trauma for years. Accent Signage's identity was forever changed. The shooting didn't just steal lives. It tore apart a place built on craftsmanship and trust. Inside the plant, machines went silent for days. Employees gathered outside in shock, holding candles, whispering prayers. Some workers could never step inside the building again. Others returned only after months of counseling. Survivors described nightmares, panic attacks, the sound of gunfire replaying in their minds, guilt for surviving, fear of returning to work. Overwhelming grief for lost colleagues. One survivor said, "We thought he was just quiet. We never knew he was suffering." Another said, "You never think your workplace could turn into a war zone, but it did." Families of the victims mourned deeply. A father who left behind young children. A supervisor who spent decades helping the company grow. Workers whose families depended on them. Lives were broken, dreams shattered. A community cut open. This wasn't just a workplace tragedy. It was a human one. In the aftermath, experts, psychologists, and workplace safety consultants studied the case extensively. The lessons were clear. 1. Isolation can be dangerous when left unchecked. Silence is not always harmless. It can hide profound psychological decline. 2. Terminations are higher-risk moments. Anger, humiliation, and perceived injustice can collide violently. 3. Mental health matters even in workplaces that don't talk about it. Ignoring subtle signs can lead to catastrophic outcomes. 4. Preparation isn't paranoia. Security protocols save lives. Threat assessments save futures. 5. Violence rarely erupts without warning. Looking back, the signs were there. Small, quiet, overlooked, but present. This tragedy is now used in training sessions nationwide, a case study in prevention, intervention, and awareness. Not because the people involved made unforgivable mistakes, but because society must learn from what it failed to see. The events of September 27, 2012, will never fully fade. Not for the families, not for the survivors, not for the community. The factory reopened, new employees joined, machines hummed again. But for those who lived through that day, the sound of normal operations carries a shadow, a reminder that behind every quiet coworker, every stressed employee, every termination meeting, there may be a story unfolding that no one else can see. Sometimes the greatest danger is not the argument we hear, but the silence we ignore. Chapter 5: The Termination Meeting that never should have happened. In most workplaces, a termination meeting is uncomfortable, awkward, painful, but safe. It ends with a signature, a badge turned in, a quiet walk to the parking lot. But what happens when the person being terminated should never have legally owned a weapon? When multiple government systems make mistakes, not once, not twice, but repeatedly, allowing a violent man to keep a gun he was forbidden to have? And what happens when that man walks into a meeting room with that gun already hidden in his jacket? On February 15, 2019, inside a manufacturing plant in Aurora, Illinois, those failures collided in a single room and triggered one of the deadliest workplace attacks the state had ever seen. This is the story of Gary Montez Martin, a system that failed to stop him, and a termination meeting that became a battleground. Gary Martin wasn't a new hire. He had been working at the Henry Pratt Company, a manufacturer of industrial valves, for more than 15 years. To some co-workers he was quiet and withdrawn, to others he was unpredictable. The kind of man who could seem calm one moment and furious the next. But what almost no one knew was this: he had a long criminal history before joining the company, including a felony aggravated assault conviction from Mississippi, a documented pattern of domestic violence, a history of threats during arguments. That felony alone made it illegal for him to own a firearm. But years earlier, due to a glitch in an interstate database, his criminal record didn't appear during an Illinois background check, so he was approved for a firearm owner's ID card, a permit he should never have received. That approval would later become one of the most catastrophic clerical errors in Illinois history. Inside the Henry Pratt facility, the atmosphere was typical of industrial manufacturing: rigid deadlines, heavy machinery, strict safety rules, loud equipment drowning out small talk. Martin had been struggling for months. Supervisors documented performance issues, co-workers noticed his growing resentment. Some said he believed management was picking on him, others said he frequently complained about being singled out. But the clearest warning came from his own words. According to later interviews, Martin had told at least 2 co-workers, "If they ever fire me, they'll regret it." No one reported the threat. They thought he was venting. People vent in factories all the time. You don't think they mean it, but Martin meant it. And the day he was asked to attend a termination meeting, he brought something with him, a Smith & Wesson .40 caliber handgun the state of Illinois had tried but failed to confiscate years earlier. It was early afternoon on February 15th. The termination committee gathered in a small room: the plant manager, the human resources manager, a supervisor. 2 additional HR representatives. They expected anger. They expected pushback. No one expected violence. At approximately 1:20 p.m., Martin entered the room. Witnesses later said he appeared tense, eyes tight, jaw clenched, breathing shallow. HR began explaining the decision: performance problems, documentation, prior warnings. Martin didn't shout. He didn't argue. He didn't stand. Instead, he rose slightly from his chair, reached into his waistband, and pulled out a handgun. The room erupted. The first shot struck the plant manager, then the HR manager, then the supervisor closest to Martin. Witnesses described the sound as deafening metallic thunder inside a small, enclosed space. Some victims collapsed instantly. Others scrambled for the door. But Martin wasn't focused on escape. He was focused on punishment. His anger had been building for years, and now, in his mind, he had reached the moment of vengeance. Within seconds, 3 people were dead or dying. 2 more were critically injured. The termination meeting had turned into a massacre. Workers across the facility froze. Some ducked behind machinery. Others ran toward exits. Emergency phone calls flooded 911. And as panic spread, Martin stepped into the hallway. The warehouse was filled with hundreds of workers. Most had no idea what had just happened. Gunfire echoed sporadically, distorted by machines, metal, and distance. Martin moved through the facility, firing at employees who crossed his path. 1 worker was shot while trying to help a wounded colleague. Another was hit near the stairs. Others hid in break rooms or behind stacked pallets. Some locked themselves in offices. Others escaped through side doors into the freezing February air. Screams mixed with alarms. Cries for help echoed through the large industrial building. By the time police arrived, several more employees had been shot. But the nightmare wasn't over. Martin was still inside the building, armed, moving, and unpredictable. Aurora police responded with urgency. Within minutes, the parking lot filled with patrol cars, tactical units, K-9 teams, ambulances, state police backup officers entered the building and were immediately ambushed. Martin fired through machinery and shelving units. The factory floor became a labyrinth, full of blind corners, metal noise, and thick obstacles. 5 officers were injured within minutes. Their body cameras later revealed chaos, echoing gunfire, officers shouting directions, injured colleagues being dragged to safety, narrow hallways becoming choke points. Martin kept moving, using the environment to his advantage. This wasn't random shooting anymore. It was a standoff. A gunman with nothing left to lose versus officers risking everything to stop him. The factory was enormous. Multiple floors, long corridors, machinery large enough to hide behind. Martin moved unpredictably, shooting from behind equipment, retreating deeper into the plant. Changing positions between shots, police had difficulty locating him. Noise ricocheted everywhere, making it impossible to determine direction. For nearly 90 minutes, the facility remained a battleground. Officers formed small tactical teams to sweep each section. At one point, Martin emerged from behind a row of valves and opened fire on a group of officers entering a side room. They returned fire. And finally, after dozens of rounds exchanged, Martin fell to the ground. When officers reached him, he had succumbed to his wounds. The rampage was over, but the damage was irreversible. After the scene was secured, investigators pieced together Martin's history, and what they found outraged the public. Fact 1, he was a convicted felon. He was legally forbidden from owning a gun. Fact 2, Illinois approved his firearm ID anyway. A database error prevented Mississippi's criminal records from showing up in the initial check. Fact 3, the state discovered the mistake later. When Martin tried to buy a handgun, a deeper check flagged his felony conviction. Fact for his firearm permit was revoked. On paper only, Martin received a letter instructing him to surrender his weapon. He never did, and no one followed up. No home check, no enforcement visit, no retrieval request, nothing. This failure allowed him to keep the handgun used in the massacre. Fact 5, he made threats before the shooting. Co-workers confirmed he had threatened retaliation, expressed hatred toward management, warned he might do something if fired, but none of these warnings reached the police. None triggered intervention. None were documented beyond casual co-worker conversation. The tragedy wasn't one failure, it was many, stacked, layered, compounded, and when those failures collided with the wrong person, the result was deadly. 5 employees were killed. 6 police officers were wounded. Dozens of workers suffered trauma that lingered for years. Families filed lawsuits. The state faced intense scrutiny. The Illinois State Police issued multiple statements acknowledging the errors. Eventually, courts awarded $60 million in civil judgments to victims' families. These weren't just financial compensations. They were acknowledgments that the system had failed, that oversight had been weak, that lives had been lost because protocols weren't enforced. The tragedy triggered statewide reforms, including stronger enforcement of revoked firearm permits, improved interstate background checks, new procedures for retrieving weapons from prohibited owners, more training for high-risk termination meetings. The Henry Pratt Company also changed many policies, including enhanced security during sensitive HR interactions. But no policy could undo the violence of that day. No reform could bring back the lives lost. Victims' families describe the pain vividly. One daughter said, "He left for work like any other day. He never came home." A co-worker tearfully recalled, "He warned us. We just didn't take him seriously enough." An injured officer said, "I've been on the job 20 years. I've never seen anything like that." Some workers quit the plant permanently. Some transferred. Some could never return to manufacturing again. Trauma reshaped an entire workforce, and the warehouse, once filled with routine noise, became a reminder of how quickly ordinary life can be shattered. Part 1. What this tragedy teaches us. The Aurora shooting has become a case study in workplaces, police academies, and behavioral analysis programs across the country. Its lessons are sobering. 1. Background checks are only as strong as the systems behind them. One glitch can kill. 2. Revoked firearm permits mean nothing if not enforced. Paper warnings don't stop bullets. 3. Threats should never be ignored. Co-workers often dismiss alarming statements, but hindsight shows they matter. 4. Termination meetings are high-risk events, especially when employees have behavioral flags. 5. Quiet resentment can grow into catastrophic violence. Martin didn't explode out of nowhere. His anger had been simmering for years. February 15, 2019, should have been just a Friday. Workers should have finished their shifts. Supervisors should have gone home to their families. Police officers should have responded to routine calls. Instead, it became a day defined by system failures, hidden resentment, and tragic consequences. The memory of that day lives on, in the families of the victims and the officers who risked their lives, in the co-workers who still hear echoes of gunfire, and in the policies forever changed because of one violent afternoon. The tragedy is more than an incident. It is a reminder, when systems fail, people pay the price. Chapter 6: The engineer who came back into the boardroom. Silicon Valley is known for brilliant minds, relentless ambition, and companies rising from garage startups to global giants. But beneath the glow of innovation lies a truth many overlook: pressure doesn't break loudly. Sometimes it breaks in silence. Inside one small tech company, a quiet, hard-working engineer began to unravel, not through arguments, not through open threats, but through the invisible collapse of his world. Financial pressure, immigration worries, the shame of sudden unemployment, and a belief that the people who fired him had destroyed his future. On November 14, 2008, that silent collapse turned violent when Jing, a trusted semiconductor engineer, walked back into his former workplace, not for closure, but for revenge. The tragedy that followed would devastate a startup, shock the tech community, and expose the emotional fragility hiding beneath Silicon Valley's glossy exterior. Seaport, Inc. wasn't Google or Apple. It was a mid-sized semiconductor startup, ambitious, pressured, hopeful. They designed specialized chips for portable devices, hoping to secure a breakthrough in a crowded market. Among their engineers was Jing, a man colleagues described as quiet, intelligent, meticulous, disciplined. He wasn't charismatic. He wasn't a team leader. He was the kind of engineer startups rely on: consistent, focused, reliable. Co-workers rarely saw him upset. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gossip. He didn't complain. But stability on the outside doesn't always reflect stability within. Behind his calm demeanor were stressors few people knew about. He had a wife and children at home. His visa status depended on employment. His finances were strained. His self-worth was tied to his career. For Wu, being laid off wasn't just a job loss, it was an existential threat. MC number 2 in 2008. The global economy shook violently. Startups struggled. Investors panicked. Companies began cutting staff. Seaport was no different. Revenue was unstable. Budgets tightened. Layoffs became necessary. Wu was among those selected. Management scheduled a meeting. They delivered the news professionally, sympathetically even. There were no harsh words, no tension, but in Wu's mind, the layoff felt personal. He believed he had been wronged, he had been targeted, he had been betrayed. The executives didn't value him. Layoffs often feel cold. For someone already under pressure, they feel catastrophic. Co-workers later said he seemed stunned after the meeting. He didn't rant, he didn't lash out, he simply left the building quietly. But inside his silence, something was breaking. Over the next few weeks, Wu's emotional state deteriorated. Friends noticed. He was irritable. He complained about injustice. He said executives had ruined his life. He believed his firing was planned against him. The layoff wasn't just a financial blow. It shattered his identity. Wu had built his entire life on being a provider, a stable, intelligent, hardworking engineer. Suddenly he wasn't any of those things, at least, not in his own mind. Psychologists later described his mindset as fixated. Resentment, a dangerous psychological state where a person cannot detach from a perceived injustice. He wasn't thinking about new job applications. He wasn't thinking about recovery. He was thinking about them. The CEO, the VP of operations, the head of HR, the 3 people who sat across from him during the layoff. The 3 people he blamed. Friday, November 14, 2008. A normal workday. Inside Seaport's conference room, 3 executives met. The CEO, the VP of operations, the HR director. They weren't preparing for a firing. They weren't expecting conflict. They were simply doing routine business. At approximately 1:55 p.m., Wu entered the building. He walked with familiarity because he knew the layout. He had worked there for years. No one questioned him. No one asked why he was back. No one noticed the gun. Surveillance footage later showed a calm, determined expression. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't frantic. He was resolute. He walked directly toward the conference room, opened the door, stepped inside, and without a word he raised the gun. The attack was immediate and devastating. The CEO was shot first, then the HR director, then the VP of operations. All three were killed almost instantly. Witnesses outside the room heard multiple rapid shots, a brief scream, then silence by the time employees peeked into the hallway to understand the noise. Wu was already leaving the building. There was no standoff, no argument, no hesitation, just cold, calculated execution. Employees who saw him flee described a chilling detail. He didn't run, he walked, calmly, as if he had simply finished a meeting. Santa Clara police responded within minutes. By then, Wu was gone, but he wasn't far. Detectives, using surveillance footage, eyewitness accounts, his vehicle registration, and cell phone pings, tracked his movements across the city for several hours. Silicon Valley was on edge. Companies locked down, employees sheltered in place. Helicopters circled overhead. Tactical units swept business complexes. Investigators understood something crucial. A man who killed 3 executives in under a minute might be planning to kill more. At approximately 5 p.m., officers located Wu in a nearby city. He did not resist. He surrendered calmly, just as he had walked calmly into the conference room hours earlier. As investigators dug deeper, a disturbing psychological picture emerged. Wu wasn't psychotic. He wasn't delusional. He wasn't imagining conspiracies in the schizophrenic sense. Instead, he exhibited a different profile. 1. Fixated obsession. He believed the executives intentionally targeted him for termination. 2. Catastrophic thinking. He saw the layoff not as a setback, but as the destruction of his entire future. 3. Emotional collapse under pressure. With financial strain, visa concerns, and family responsibilities, he lost the ability to cope. 4. A belief that violence was justified. He saw killing them as restoring fairness. Experts later categorized the case as targeted workplace retaliation driven by identity collapse. It wasn't spontaneous, it wasn't random, it was focused, personal, planned. Wu was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder enhancements for firearm use, special circumstances due to multiple victims. His defense argued extreme emotional distress, financial pressure, cultural shame, psychological instability. But prosecution emphasized he purchased the gun earlier. He walked directly to the conference room. He shot only the executives, not random employees. He fled strategically. He surrendered calmly. This was not loss of control. This was intent. After a long legal process, nearly 5 years, he was convicted. On August 2, 2013, Wu was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But the punishment didn't heal what had been broken. Not for the families, not for the employees, and not for the company. Seaport never recovered. The loss of all top leadership in a single afternoon was an earthquake the young company couldn't survive. Investors withdrew, projects stalled, clients lost confidence, employees resigned in waves. Within months, the startup collapsed completely. A company built through years of work was destroyed in less than 60 seconds. Former employees described a surreal aftermath. We lost our leaders. We lost our jobs. It felt like evil walked straight into our conference room. A workplace shooting isn't just an attack, it's an amputation. And in this case, the company never regained its footing. The victims weren't just executives, they were fathers, husbands, providers, leaders, innovators. Their families described the devastation. A spouse whispered, "He left for work. He never came home." A child asked, "Why would someone hurt my dad?" There are no comforting answers in a tragedy born from fixation, only empty spaces where futures used to be. This case forced Silicon Valley and the world to confront uncomfortable truths. 1. Layoffs create emotional shockwaves. Even when done professionally, they can break people whose identity is tied to their job. 2. Engineers are not emotionless machines. The stereotype of the quiet, stable tech worker is misleading. They can suffer silently. 3. Startups lack threat assessment protocols. Large corporations have security teams. Startups rarely do. 4. Immigration pressure amplifies instability. Losing a job can mean losing legal status. 5. Violence doesn't always come from the loudest person. Sometimes it comes from the quietest. November 14, 2008, remains one of Silicon Valley's darkest days. A place built on innovation was shaken by violence. A startup disappeared. 3 families were shattered. One man's unraveling left scars on an entire community. The tragedy reminds us, pressure is invisible, despair is silent, and the people who seem the calmest may be fighting battles no one sees. This story isn't just about a shooting, it's about how a life collapses when support systems fail, and a man walks back into a place he once worked, not as an engineer, but as someone who believed violence was the only answer. Chapter 7: The Custody Battle. There are few places more peaceful than a suburban hair salon. The soft buzz of clippers, the smell of shampoo, the chatter of clients catching up after weeks apart. No one imagines violence entering this space. No one imagines death in a place built for beauty and self-care. But on October 12, 2011, inside the Salon Meritage in Seal Beach, California, everyday life collided with the darkest part of human emotion. A father consumed by rage, a man drowning in bitterness, an ex-husband who believed the legal system had betrayed him, and a custody battle that became the spark for the deadliest mass shooting in Orange County history. This is not just a story of a murderer. It is a story of a man whose inner storm went unchecked for years, until it finally broke. Scott Evans Dekrai seemed stable on the outside. He had spent years as a tugboat operator, a demanding job requiring discipline, physical strength, and emotional steadiness. But behind that exterior was a complicated man. In 2007, during a tugboat towing accident, a mooring line snapped with catastrophic force. The explosion of tension crushed his right leg, nearly amputating it. The injury ended his marine career and left him with chronic pain that would follow him for the rest of his life. Doctors described him afterward as suffering chronic nerve pain, post-traumatic stress, depression, episodes of emotional volatility. A man already vulnerable suddenly had his life direction shattered. But the deeper fracture was yet to come. His marriage to Michelle Fournier, a beloved hairstylist at Salon Meritage, had been turbulent for years. Arguments escalated into shouting. Emotion turned into bitterness. Bitterness turned into threats. Their relationship collapsed irreparably in 2007. The divorce was bitter. The custody battle over their 8-year-old son became even worse. Michelle accused Dekrai of being unstable. He insisted she was poisoning their son against him. Courtrooms became battlegrounds. Police reports became weapons. Therapists became referees. Friends of Michelle said she lived in constant fear. Friends of Dekrai said he lived in constant rage. Two people wounded in different ways, both believing the system was failing them. But for Dekrai, belief turned into obsession. Dekrai believed the family court system had robbed him of his relationship with his son. He believed Michelle and the judges ruling for her were conspiring against him. His anger sharpened into fixation. He wrote angry emails. He sent long, bitter texts. He recorded phone calls. He began talking to friends about ending it. One friend reported him saying, "If I can't win, I'll make sure nobody wins." Another said he hinted at getting even. In custody courts across America, emotional pain often builds silently. But what made this case different was Dekrai's personality, rigid, vengeful, unable to accept loss, convinced he was the victim of everyone else's wrongdoing. Psychologists later described him as having pathological entitlement, catastrophic thinking, and narcissistic injury. He didn't just feel betrayed, he felt destroyed, and in his mind, someone had to pay for that. On October 11, 2011, one day before the shooting, a new court ruling was delivered. The judge sided with Michelle in a custody dispute, further limiting Dekrai's visitation rights. To him, it wasn't just a legal decision. It was an attack on his identity as a father. He raged about it to friends. He threatened legal retaliation. He demanded changes. He spiraled emotionally. The next morning, he drove to a sporting goods store. He purchased ammunition. He loaded several handguns. He put on a tactical vest. He prepared 3 weapons, a 9mm Springfield XDA .45 caliber Heckler & Koch, a .44 Magnum Smith & Wesson revolver. He packed extra magazines. He put on body armor, and then he got into his white Toyota pickup truck and drove toward Salon Meritage. He wasn't planning an argument, he was planning an execution. It was just after 1:20 p.m. Inside the salon, stylists chatted and laughed as they worked. Michelle was busy at her station cutting a client's hair. Customers sat with magazines open, soaking their nails, sipping coffee. No one noticed the man walking quickly toward the entrance. Dekrai entered wearing a bulletproof vest and carrying multiple weapons. He moved with chilling purpose. He walked directly toward Michelle, the woman he blamed for everything. Without hesitation, he raised his weapon and fired multiple rounds into her. Michelle collapsed instantly. Customers screamed. Stylists dove to the floor. But Dekrai wasn't finished. He turned his gun toward others in the salon and began shooting. A customer in the waiting area, a stylist hiding behind a counter, another client near the back, a man sitting calmly under a dryer, 2 stylists who tried to flee, the salon owner who attempted to intervene. 8 people were shot. 6 died immediately. 2 more succumbed to their injuries later. The slaughter lasted less than 2 minutes. The beauty salon became a battlefield. After the shooting, DeCray walked outside calmly, got into his truck, and drove away. Witnesses scrambled to memorize his license plate. 911 calls poured in. Within minutes, Seal Beach police spotted his vehicle less than a half-mile from the salon. They surrounded him. Dashcam footage later showed a surreal detail. He surrendered peacefully. He placed his hands on the steering wheel. He got out of the truck slowly. He followed every command. The man who had executed 8 people did not resist arrest. He showed no emotion, no remorse, no panic, just emptiness. Detectives interrogated him for hours. The motive became clear. 1. Rage at Michelle for the custody battle. He believed she had turned their son against him. 2. Rage at the court system. He believed judges had unfairly favored her. 3. Rage at everyone who supported Michelle. He believed the salon was her world, and therefore, a symbol of his defeat. His mindset was vengeance, not insanity. Prosecutors built a detailed psychological profile. He planned the attack. He selected the weapons deliberately. He rehearsed mentally. He executed methodically. He stopped shooting only when he believed all targets were down. This wasn't a moment of temporary madness. This was premeditated annihilation. DeCray was charged with 8 counts of capital murder. 1 count of attempted murder. The prosecution sought the death penalty. But what followed became one of the most shocking legal twists in California history. Orange County prosecutors and sheriff's deputies were discovered to have used jailhouse informants illegally, hidden evidence from defense attorneys violated DeCray's constitutional rights during interrogation. A massive scandal erupted, one that affected dozens of cases across the county. The judge eventually ruled DeCray could not receive the death penalty, not because he was innocent, but because government misconduct compromised the integrity of the trial. The victims' families were devastated. Many said they felt betrayed not just by DeCray, but by the system meant to protect them. Ultimately, DeCray received life in prison without parole. Justice was served, but imperfectly. Seal Beach is a small, quiet community, the kind where locals greet each other by name. The massacre shattered that peace. Families lost. Mothers, fathers, spouses, friends, co-workers, children lost. Parents lost children. Communities lost neighbors. Salon Meritage never reopened as a working business. It became a memorial site, a place where haircuts stopped and grief began. One survivor said, "I can still smell the hairspray. I can still hear the screams." Another said, "He didn't just kill 8 people. He killed our sense of safety." The emotional wounds ran deep. Years later, they still haven't healed fully. Experts studied the Seal Beach massacre for years. Their conclusions were chilling. 1. Family court-related violence is highly predictable when custody battles become primal and identity-defining. Some individuals turn violent. 2. Restraining orders don't always stop someone determined to kill. Michelle had expressed fear. Friends said she worried about Scott. 3. Domestic violence often escalates to public violence. The relationship between Michelle and Scott had years of volatility, or people underestimate the danger posed by quiet men. DeCray wasn't outwardly explosive. His violence grew silently. 5. Gun access transforms emotional grievance into mass tragedy. He legally owned multiple firearms, despite documented emotional instability. This wasn't randomness. It was preventable tragedy. But the warnings were scattered, overlooked, unconnected. October 12, 2011, is a date seared into Southern California history. In less than 2 minutes, a father destroyed an entire community. A custody battle turned into a massacre. A salon became a crime scene. 8 lives were stolen. 1 child lost both parents, the victim and the perpetrator. This chapter isn't just about violence, it's about the fragility of anger, the weight of emotional collapse, and the devastation that follows when resentment becomes a weapon. It is a reminder. Some storms don't rumble, they don't flash, they don't warn, they walk quietly through the front door and end everything. Chapter 8. The Lottery Manager. The Connecticut Lottery headquarters in Rocky Hill was a place of numbers, optimism, and televised excitement. Every morning, staff arrived to process winning tickets, run security checks, and prepare for broadcasts that millions of residents trusted. It wasn't a battlefield. It wasn't a pressure cooker. It wasn't the kind of place anyone imagined a massacre. But on March 6, 1998, an employee named Matthew Beck, a longtime supervisor and trusted operations manager, walked through the front doors with something hidden under his jacket, a semi-automatic pistol and a storm of humiliation and resentment that had been building for years. By the time the chaos ended, 4 executives were dead. Workers were hiding behind filing cabinets and lottery machines, and a man who once monitored winning tickets had become the orchestrator of the deadliest workplace shooting in Connecticut history. This is how a dependable lottery worker unraveled, and why no one saw it happening. Matthew Beck, 35 years old, had worked at the Connecticut Lottery Corporation for years. He was responsible, punctual, detail-oriented. Co-workers described him as quiet, disciplined, respectful, not the kind of guy who'd ever start trouble. But beneath that calm exterior lived a very different emotional landscape. Thames struggled with severe depression, chronic anxiety, episodes of paranoia, fear of failure, a deep need for validation. Those who knew him personally said he carried humiliation like a scar, real or imagined. It didn't matter. If he believed someone mocked him, doubted him, or dismissed him, the wounds stayed open. And in the years before the shooting, those wounds multiplied. Thames had a complicated relationship with his supervisors. He felt overlooked, underappreciated, and disrespected. A key incident occurred months before the shooting. A disciplinary meeting was held regarding procedural errors in the department he oversaw. Executives confronted him sharply. He felt singled out. He felt attacked. He felt humiliated in a room full of people he believed should be beneath him. Witnesses said he left the meeting ashen, humiliated, and furious. But quiet. Quiet fury is the most dangerous kind. After that, his behavior changed. He spoke less. He avoided supervisors. He stayed late without telling anyone why. He muttered about unfair treatment. He became obsessed with the executives he believed had embarrassed him. Co-workers later recalled him saying, "They took something from me." At the time, it sounded like frustration. Later, those words would feel like prophecy. In February 1998, a car accident left Thames injured, not severely, but enough to worsen his depression and sense of instability. He took time off work. During his leave, his resentment hardened. He fixated on the humiliation from the disciplinary meeting. He replayed it in his mind. He convinced himself the executives were out to ruin him. Co-workers didn't know this. Supervisors didn't know this. HR didn't know this. Only Thames knew the storm brewing inside him. When he returned to work in early March, something was different. He had made a decision. March 6, 1998, 8:15 a.m. Workers were settling in, booting up computers, sorting paperwork. Thames parked outside, sat in his car for several minutes, and loaded his 9mm Beretta. He wore a heavy coat large enough to conceal the weapon. He walked toward the entrance with steady, deliberate steps. Receptionists greeted him. He nodded politely. No one noticed the tension in his jaw. No one saw the shaking in his right hand. No one knew why he was there early. He walked down the hallway, past employee mailboxes, past the break room, past cubicles. He stopped outside the office of the lottery CEO. Inside were 2 of the executives he blamed for humiliating him. Thames inhaled deeply, opened the door, and stepped inside. The attack began instantly. Thames pulled out the 9mm pistol and shot the CEO, Ole Pease, multiple times at close range. Another executive dove for cover but was hit in the back. Secretaries in nearby cubicles heard the shots and screamed. Some dropped to the floor, others ran down hallways. A few were frozen in shock. Thames moved with terrifying precision. He did not shout, he did not threaten, he did not hesitate. He was there to eliminate the people who, in his mind, destroyed him. The first office was hit. Then he moved on. Thames walked through the building searching for specific individuals, executives, supervisors, anyone involved in disciplinary decisions. He shot President Ole Pease dead. He shot Vice President Michael Logan dead. He shot Vice President David Floyd dead. He shot Lottery Chairman Stephen Fox dead. Each one appeared to be a targeted killing. Workers hiding under desks whispered frantically into phones. 911 calls flooded dispatch. "Someone's shooting, he's killing the bosses, please hurry please." The screams echoed through the building. Thames showed no emotion, no hesitation. He walked like a man crossing names off a list. Police converged on the building within minutes. Officers evacuated employees, cleared hallways, and prepared to confront the shooter, but the confrontation never came. Thames walked into a hallway near the executive offices, paused at the end of the corridor, and turned the gun toward himself. A single shot. Silence. He died instantly. The massacre was over. It had lasted less than 5 minutes, but the devastation was permanent. The Connecticut lottery community was shattered. Employees described scenes of blood-stained carpets, trembling survivors ringing alarms, papers scattered from overturned desks. People who had worked with Thames for years were stunned. He was quiet, he was friendly, he wasn't violent, but they didn't know the psychological battle he was fighting. The families of victims were devastated. Children lost fathers, spouses lost partners, communities lost leaders. The massacre raised questions across the state. Why had Thames spiraled unchecked? Why was no intervention attempted? Why did no one recognize the danger? Could this have been prevented? Those questions never received satisfying answers. Investigators discovered that Thames had not been taking his antidepressant medication, was overwhelmed by personal financial trouble, had developed intense workplace-related paranoia, believed he was being sabotaged, had been tracking the movements of some executives, had practiced firing his gun in recent weeks. Most chillingly, they found handwritten notes indicating, "Humiliation cannot go unanswered. They set me up. They ruined my life." To Thames, the shooting wasn't senseless. It was retribution, twisted, misguided, demented, but in his mind, justified. The Connecticut lottery shootings changed workplace safety policies across the state. Suddenly, businesses realized, 1. Warning signs aren't always loud. Thames wasn't a shouter. He wasn't aggressive. He was quietly deteriorating. 2. Mental health breaks without monitoring can be dangerous. His post-injury leave worsened his instability. 3. Humiliation is a powerful trigger, especially for individuals with depressive or paranoid tendencies. 4. Executive accessibility increases vulnerability. Leaders became high-risk targets during disciplinary conflicts. 5. Security protocols needed modernization. Doors, badge systems, panic alarms none existed at the time. The tragedy became a national case study in employee threat evaluation, for families lost loved ones in an instant. One coworker said, "I can still hear the shots when it's quiet at night." Another said, "I saw him walk past my cubicle. I thought he was coming for me." Many employees never returned to work. Some developed PTSD. Some couldn't sleep for months. A building once associated with hope and winning numbers became synonymous with grief and fear. The Connecticut lottery eventually renovated the offices, but the emotional scar remained. The story of Matthew Beck isn't about a monster who suddenly snapped. It's about a man whose inner world slowly collapsed while no one noticed. A man who mistook humiliation for conspiracy. A man who allowed resentment to become violence. On March 6, 1998, he turned a place built on optimism into a place of mourning, and in 5 minutes, 4 lives were erased, hundreds were traumatized, and a state awoke to the reality of quiet men with loud grudges. This chapter stands as a reminder: not all storms roar. Some walk silently through hallways until the moment they erupt. Chapter 9: The Immigrant Who Felt Invisible. On April 3, 2009, the American Civic Association in Binghamton, New York, opened its doors like it did every morning. Inside were immigrants from all over the world: students, workers, political refugees, PARENTS, gathered for English classes, citizenship, help, and community support. It was a sanctuary, a building filled with hope, ambition, and the promise of a new life. But at 10:30 a.m., that sanctuary became a trap. A former student, quiet, withdrawn, and consumed by resentment, walked in with no intention of learning English that day. He brought 2 pistols, extra ammunition, and a plan he had been rehearsing for weeks. His name was Jiverly Wong, and in the next few minutes, he would commit one of the deadliest shootings in New York State history. Jiverly Wong, born Wong Jun, was a 41-year-old immigrant from Vietnam who had lived in the United States for nearly 2 decades, and yet, he felt like a stranger the entire time. Friends and former co-workers described him as painfully shy, socially awkward, easily embarrassed, deeply self-critical, suspicious of others he struggled with, English steady employment, fitting into American culture, extreme self-consciousness, and emotionally, he was fragile. Even small criticisms cut deeply. A simple misunderstanding could haunt him for weeks. But the most painful wound came from something many immigrants struggle with: the feeling of never belonging. Wong believed people mocked his accent. He believed co-workers whispered about him. He believed society saw him as an outsider. Over time, that belief hardened into paranoia. To improve his English, Wang enrolled at the American Civic Association (AC), a welcoming community center where immigrants studied, socialized, and prepared for citizenship exams. At first, staff described him as quiet but polite. He rarely spoke, often sat alone, and avoided eye contact. But after months in the program, he became frustrated with his slow progress. He stopped attending regularly. He believed classmates laughed at his pronunciation. He suspected instructors favored other students. There is no evidence any of that was true. But paranoia doesn't need evidence, only emotion. One instructor recalled him returning briefly after a long absence, sitting silently in the hallway, then leaving without explanation. He was drifting away from society, and no one fully understood how far he had gone. By early 2009, Wong's life was coming apart. 1. He lost his job. He worked at a local karaoke equipment manufacturer, but was laid off. He saw it not as a business decision, but as personal rejection. 2. He argued constantly with his father. His parents expected him to succeed in America. He felt he had failed them. 3. He felt humiliated every time he spoke English. Witnesses said he sometimes whispered instead of speaking, afraid someone would mock his accent, for he became convinced people were targeting him. He told acquaintances, "They laugh at me, they follow me, they want to hurt me." These were delusions, but to him, they were truth. And he believed the act of the place meant to help him integrate into American life, was the source of his greatest humiliation. That belief would soon turn deadly. Before the attack, Wang did something investigators still find chilling. He mailed a package to a local TV station. Inside was his driver's license, his gun permit, copies of his grievances, a threatening letter written in broken English. He wrote, "I can't accept my poor life. They play me, they laugh at me. I no longer want to live." And then the most haunting line, "I plan to do it." The package arrived after the massacre. But by then, the letter was no longer a warning, it was a confession. Around 9:30 a.m., Wang left his small Johnson City apartment. He dressed in a bulletproof vest, a modified jacket, dark clothing he carried, a 9mm Beretta, a .45 caliber pistol, 98 rounds of ammunition, earplugs. He locked the door behind him, got into his compact sedan, and drove to the ACA building. At 10:30 a.m., he parked behind the center. He wedged his car between others to block escape routes. Then he walked toward the back entrance. Inside the ACA, 14 students were in English. Class instructors were preparing lesson plans, volunteers were helping immigrants fill out citizenship forms, people were laughing, people were learning, people were building new lives. Wang believed those same people mocked him. At 10:31 a.m., the first shots echoed through the hallway. Wang fired through the back door, instantly killing 2 receptionists, Linda Wu, Roberta King. They never had a chance to react. Students in nearby classrooms froze. Some thought it was construction noise. Then they heard screaming. Wong stepped inside and immediately targeted the main classroom, the same room where he once sat trying to learn English. He opened fire on the students and instructor. Chaos erupted. People hid under desks. Some dropped to the floor pretending to be dead. Others huddled against walls. Inside one class, a teacher acted fast. She moved students into a storage room, locked the door, and whispered for them to stay silent. Her actions saved every life in that room. In the classroom under attack, 13 people were shot. Most were killed instantly. At 10:33 a.m., a wounded receptionist, still alive, managed to crawl to a phone and dial 911. The call lasted 43 seconds, and her calmness, despite fatal injuries, allowed officers to respond immediately. Police arrived within minutes, surrounding the building. But Wang had prepared for this. He barricaded the front door. He blocked the back door with his car. He wore a bulletproof vest. He planned choke points inside the hallways. He even shot out some office windows to prevent snipers from getting clear sight. He wasn't improvising, he came with a plan. Throughout the building, people hid in closets, an instructor sheltered students under tables, some played dead. Others jumped from second-floor windows, several dialed 911 silently. One woman lay under a desk holding the hand of a dying classmate. In another room, a group of students whispered prayers in multiple languages, Vietnamese, Urdu, Arabic, Mandarin, Spanish, all united in fear. One survivor later said, "I waited to feel the bullets. Every second I thought it was my turn." The attack lasted just minutes, but the terror felt endless. At 10:35 a.m., just 4 minutes after the first shots, Wong walked into a classroom corner and sat down. He turned one of the pistols toward his own face, and he fired. Police breached the building minutes later, expecting an active shooter confrontation. Instead, they found 13 victims dead or wounded, dozens traumatized, the gunman lying in a pool of blood. The massacre was over, but the sorrow was just beginning. The victims represented 6 nations, a heartbreaking detail for a place built to help immigrants start new lives. China, Haiti, Vietnam, Iraq, Brazil, the United States. Their names included Hai Hongjon, Li Guolaila Khalil Maria Kalamatos Parifash Rahimi Linda Wu Roberta King, and others whose families requested privacy. Many left behind, children, spouses, elderly parents, unfinished dreams. The tragedy wasn't just local, it rippled across the globe. Investigators pieced together Wong's final months. 1. He felt humiliated by his English struggles. He believed others mocked him, a delusion fed by paranoia. 2. He blamed the ACA for his failures. He saw the center not as help, but as the source of his shame. 3. He planned the attack carefully. Weapons were purchased legally. Maps were drawn. Times were chosen specifically when classrooms were full. 4. He had no history of mental health treatment despite clear signs of deterioration. He had never sought help and never received intervention. 5. His final letters showed a desire to punish. He wrote, "I can never accept the world laughing at me. I want people to know what they did." But the people he killed had not laughed at him. Most had never met him. His rage fell upon innocents, people just like him, trying desperately to belong somewhere. The Binghamton community united in grief. Hundreds attended vigils. Flags were lowered statewide. Immigrant groups held ceremonies honoring the victims. Politicians called for reforms. Police departments reviewed response protocols. Mental health experts analyzed Wong's writings for insights into prevention. One survivor, speaking through tears, said, "We came here for a new life. We didn't know we would find death." That quote haunted New York for months. Even today, the city of Binghamton honors April 3rd as a day of remembrance. Lives were rebuilt, but the scars never disappeared. The story of Jiverly Wong is not one of pure evil. It is the story of isolation, shame, paranoia, cultural disconnection, quiet suffering that explodes. An immigrant who never felt like he belonged, a man who lost himself between two worlds and took 13 innocent people with him when he fell. The American Civic Association was meant to be a bridge, but for Wang it became a breaking point. His attack remains one of the most devastating workplace shootings in U.S. history. A reminder that internal storms too often go unseen until the world is forced to face their aftermath. And like every case in this documentary, it leaves us asking, how many tragedies could be prevented if we noticed the silent ones sooner? Chapter 10: The Woman Who Walked Back in. September 9, 2010. Just before 8:30 p.m., the night shift at the Kraft Foods plant in northeast Philadelphia was settling into its rhythm. The facility was enormous, nearly 1,600 workers, hundreds of machines, and thousands of pounds of processed food moving through the lines every hour. Workers in hairnets and gloves packed snacks under the bright fluorescents. Music played softly from someone's pocket speaker. Conversations blended with the machinery hum. On the surface, everything seemed normal, but quiet shifts often hide loud emotions. And deep inside the building, a 43-year-old forklift operator named Yvonne Hiller was reaching a breaking point no one truly saw coming. Within 2 hours she would be fired, return with a loaded handgun, hunt down co-workers she believed were tormenting her, kill 2 women, injure a third, and trap dozens inside the plant as SWAT evacuated the building. It would become one of the most shocking workplace attacks in Philadelphia's history, and one of the rare mass shootings committed by a woman. When investigators reconstructed Yvonne's life at Kraft, a troubling picture emerged. For years, she had felt isolated, mocked, disrespected, undervalued, targeted by co-workers. She wasn't silent about it either. She filed multiple complaints with management over the years, claiming that co-workers were spraying chemicals on her, tampering with her equipment, talking about her behind her back, trying to hurt her spiritually. None of these claims were substantiated. Most were dismissed as misunderstandings or workplace friction, but to Yvonne, they were very real. She believed a group of women on the line were intentionally harassing her, poisoning her sense of safety, and pushing her toward the edge. Co-workers described her as paranoid, quick to anger, emotionally fragile, fixated on certain employees. Mental health experts who later reviewed her behavior noted clear signs of persecutory delusions, the belief that others were plotting against her. These beliefs hardened over time, and by 2010 the resentment had calcified. On the night of the shooting, Yvonne had a confrontation with her co-workers. She claimed again that 2 women were spraying her with chemicals, this time from aerosol cans. Co-workers denied it. Supervisors saw no evidence, but to Yvonne, it was an attack. During her shift, a manager ordered her to undergo a drug and alcohol test, a routine procedure after such confrontations. Yvonne refused. Under Kraft policy, refusal to comply triggers immediate suspension or termination. So around 8:30 p.m., Security escorted her to the building's administrative area, where she was fired on the spot. They took her ID badge. They walked her to her car. They believed the matter was over. They did not know she kept a .357 Smith & Wesson revolver in the glove compartment, and they did not know how deep her rage truly went. 15 minutes after being escorted out, Yvonne drove back toward the Kraft Foods plant. She parked, she took the handgun, she loaded it calmly. She walked back toward the building she had just been fired from. Security protocols should have prevented her entry, but the night shift doors were not locked yet. Workers were still entering and exiting. Yvonne slipped inside unnoticed. Her face was set. Her eyes were quiet. Her steps were steady. She wasn't coming back to negotiate. She wasn't coming back to plead. She was coming back to punish the people she believed had tormented her for years. Yvonne moved through the factory aisles, gun hidden in her jacket. She walked with purpose toward the mixing area, where the women she believed had harassed her were working. The moment she arrived, she pulled out the handgun and opened fire. Her first victim was Latanya Brown, a 36-year-old employee who had worked alongside Yvonne for years. Latanya collapsed instantly. Chaos exploded. Workers screamed. Forklifts screeched to a halt. A mixing machine continued to run, drowning out cries. Yvonne's second victim, Tanya Wilson, 47, tried to flee. She didn't make it far. Yvonne shot her twice, once in the head. A third woman, Sherry Godfrey, was hit in the face, but survived by dropping to the ground and pretending to be dead. Workers scrambled in every direction, slipping on floors, ducking behind pallets, sprinting through aisles. Some prayed, some begged, some froze. But Yvonne didn't fire wildly. She moved slowly, searching for specific targets. She wanted the women she believed had harassed her, and she was ready to kill anyone who got in her way. At 8:40 p.m., someone managed to dial 911. The call lasted 19 seconds. A woman, shooting, at Kraft Foods. People are down. Please hurry. Police arrived within minutes. But the plant was massive, over 2 million square feet, with endless corridors, machinery rooms, loading docks, coolers, and blind turns. To the officers, it was a maze. To the workers hiding inside, it felt like a prison. Hundreds of employees crouched behind machinery, stacking boxes in front of them like makeshift shields. Some hid under conveyor belts. Others locked themselves inside break rooms. A few climbed onto racks and shut off their headlamps. One worker later said, "The machines were still running, we couldn't hear her. We didn't know if she was behind us." The terror was immediate, but the confusion was worse. A female mass shooter was nearly unheard of. Police didn't even know who they were searching for. Yvonne didn't run, she didn't shout, she didn't spray bullets randomly like many mass shooters. She stalked room to room, aisle to aisle. Methodical, purposeful. She believed she was justified. She believed she was righting wrongs. She believed she was the victim. Psychologists later noted this attack was entirely consistent with persecutory delusion, escalation, a mental state where a person becomes convinced they are under threat and must retaliate to survive. For 16 minutes Yvonne moved through the plant, gun in hand, sometimes calling out, "Where are they?" Officers entered from multiple angles, clearing rooms one by one, her footsteps echoing somewhere deeper inside. Around 8:56 p.m., police located Yvonne near a large production bay. She was standing beside a section of conveyor belts, gun lowered but ready. Officers shouted, "Drop the weapon." She didn't fire. Instead, she stepped backward into a small storage room and locked the door. SWAT surrounded her location. The tension was suffocating, workers trapped inside, 2 victims dead, 1 fighting for her life. A shooter barricaded inside a room with unknown intentions. Negotiators attempted to speak to her. "Yvonne, we don't want anyone else hurt. Talk to us." But she said little, mostly quiet, sometimes muttering, occasionally crying. Her rage had burned itself into exhaustion. After nearly an hour of standoff, Yvonne slid her handgun under the door and surrendered peacefully. Officers took her into custody. Workers were evacuated in small groups. Some emerged sobbing. Others were numb. Some were shaking so badly they could not climb down the stairs without assistance. Police found 2 women dead and another clinging to life. Sherry Godfrey was rushed to the hospital. She survived after extensive treatment. The factory floor that usually smelled of chocolate and baked goods now reeked of gunpowder, machinery, oil, and fear. In the weeks following the attack, investigators pieced together Yvonne's mental state. She wasn't evil. She was ill. Her mind had built a narrative where co-workers poisoned her, supervisors plotted against her, women on the line harassed her, the company targeted her for firing. None of it was true. But once her mind accepted those beliefs as reality, her actions became, to her, a form of survival. Experts diagnosed her with paranoid delusional disorder, deteriorating impulse control, severe emotional dysregulation. Under workplace stress, the tragedy was preventable, but no one recognized the signals. LaTanya Brown, 36, a mother of one, known for her warmth and kindness. Tanya Wilson, 47, a woman loved by co-workers, described as the heart of the line. Sherry Godfrey survived, but her injuries changed her life forever. Their families were devastated. Their co-workers were traumatized. Their community demanded answers. Kraft Foods issued statements, offered counseling, and re-evaluated security policies. But grief has no policy fix. Yvonne Hiller was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted murder weapons violations. During sentencing, prosecutors presented evidence of planning and intent. Her defense argued mental illness diminished her ability to understand reality. But the court's decision was firm. She was sentenced to life in prison. To this day, she has never expressed remorse, only confusion, frustration, and continued belief that she was victimized. It is common in persecutory delusion cases. The narrative becomes the truth. The Kraft Foods shooting is now studied by workplace violence experts because 1. The shooter was female, extremely rare. Represents less than 2% of mass shooters. 2. Delusional paranoia was the driving factor. Her attack was rooted in perceived and not real threats. 3. Firing triggered immediate retaliation, one of the strongest risk predictors in workplace violence cases. 4. Security gaps allowed, easy re-entry doors were unlocked, no badge required for re-entry. 5. Co-workers saw signs but didn't interpret them as danger, withdrawal, fixation, accusations, emotional volatility. Individually small, together catastrophic. The Kraft Foods plant massacre wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about control. It wasn't about hatred. It was about a woman who felt invisible, and whose untreated mental illness grew louder than reality. A single firing meeting became the spark. A loaded handgun became the weapon. And a workplace meant for cooperation became a hunting ground. 2 women never returned home from their shift. Dozens more will never forget the screams, the gunshots, the cold terror of hiding behind pallets and machinery. Workplaces today are safer because of cases like this, but safer doesn't mean safe enough. Because sometimes the danger is not in the loud ones, it is in the silent ones. The ones who smile politely, the ones who stand alone, the ones whose breaking point is invisible until the moment it explodes.